You already know what it is. Your boy Bands alongside Christina. We have a Spark Up podcast. We got two special guests in the house.
We do.
Come on.
She's a special guest.
Come on. Christina, who do you have?
We have here with us Miss Ashley Reyes, who will be a guest host for the month. I'm excited. Yes. So Ashley has been a guest on the podcast before. And I really like the way she speaks, the way she is. And she's a journalist at heart. So I thought it made sense to have her here for Women's History Month as we sit here with our special guest who is also making history. Oh, I'm so excited.
Let's talk about it.
I said to them, let's do an unbiased.
That's why I've contained myself.
I'm like, let's do unbiased, try to be objective versus subjective. But it's so hard to do that when you're sitting with people you respect, people that reflect you. And, we're in close quarters. We're like one person separated.
We're neighbors.
We're literally. And so without further ado, I would like to introduce Nirva LaFortune, Councilwoman, and first Haitian American to hold elected office in Rhode Island. You can't hear the air horns, but they're going off here. That's how we do it here on the Sparkle Podcast. So welcome, and congratulations on everything. So first off, I want to go with asking, because you have so many roles. I was doing research on you and I'm like, okay, when does this woman sleep? Honestly, how do you do it all? How do you manage all the hats that you wear?
That's a loaded question. I think I have to learn how to rest versus sleep. And remind myself that self-care is critical. But sometimes when you're really passionate about the work that you're doing, you care about the work, you get really focused. And I truly believe that some of the things that I'm like, everything that I do is far greater than me, because it's not just for me, but it's also for my community. And when we think about just the history of women, the history of Black women, women of color, there are not many of us, particularly Black women, brown women, indigenous women, women of color, immigrant women in general, who are running for office, who are taking on these leadership roles because they have to balance personal life, family, work, and all these things. And what I hope that I can do is, challenge the status quo and show women everywhere, women and girls and just people who don't necessarily fit into a particular box or mold, that you can be a leader, you can be in an elected position, you can run, a company, as we're seeing people are doing, like Miss Ursula, who's doing it with, Xerox. But there's so much that we can do. And I think that we just have to look beyond the barriers. And when those barriers are brought before us, figure out how to work around them, because there's always a way. So, for me, it's a lot, but I want to change things.
It's fulfilling.
I want to change things. So change comes with adversity. And it's also not easy. Right? But you got to start somewhere.
Definitely.
I want to scale it back a little bit and start with, who is Nirva?
Who's Nirva? So it's Nirva. So it's Nirva LaFortune.
Nirva.
Yeah, so that's my
Did I get it right?
Say it again for the people that missed it the first time.
Nirva. Okay. Nirva. So Nilva. So my parents would be like, Nirva LaFortune. So I'm a kid from the south side of Providence. I'm an immigrant. I'm a mother. I'm a child of God. I'm a daughter. I'm a friend. And I'm a community steward. And so I came to this country when I was 3, and like many immigrants, I was also separated from my family. My parents had to make the difficult decision to come here. They had received migrant visas, and so they came to be migrant workers in the United States. But because our immigration system is so jacked up, they didn't even give their toddler child paperwork. So my mom actually was the first one to leave. She left before I turned 1. My dad followed. But they still refused to give me documentation. And this was also during the fall of a dictatorship in Haiti. It was the fall of Duvalier. And so when I got here, it was just a brand new world. It was cold. I didn't speak the language. I joined my parents in a tenement house. They were renting a room on Dexter.
Wow.
From there, we moved to a 1-bedroom apartment on Dartmouth Avenue. And we lived there until 1990 when Sam was born, my brother. And my mom and my dad, they bought a house in Washington Park. And they've been in that same house for over 31 years now.
Oof.
Wow.
So, I think about my journey. We were living in a 1-bedroom. I think it was 7 or 8 of us when my grandfather used to visit that lived in that room. I shared a bed with my sisters and my grandmother.
Wow.
And to think that, this kid who was undocumented, went through our public schools, grew up in a neighborhood like Dartmouth was.
That's on the West End, right?
No.
Like it's Elmwood. Elmwood, right off between Elmwood and Broad Street. The West End would be like Dexter was the West End. So literally from where we lived on Dartmouth, it was the first house on Dartmouth Avenue on the Elmwood side. You can walk a block to go to where we lived on Dexter, right? So my whole life was in 1 square mile. Like we would go to like the Southside Cultural Center for my dad to get his English lessons. Yeah. We went to Knight Memorial Library to take out books to practice, right? We went to the Kentucky Fried Chicken for my chickens for snacks.
We all know what Kentucky Fried Chicken. I know what Kentucky.
I used to have to go to Knight Memorial to get all my Dragon Ball Z pictures.
I was gonna say we were raised on the West End, so I'm still there, but that's home.
Our family church was on the West End, but that would be considered more so Elmwood Avenue. But I went to the Cranston Street, it was the health center. Now it's the neighborhood health center. From the time I came to America until I graduated from high school, St. Joseph's Hospital is where I got all my lead treatments.
Wow.
So everything was walking distance because at first we didn't have a car. But just to think that, this kid who had lead poison, undocumented, went through the public school, grew up like also on a block where we would wake up on a Sunday morning, there would be blood stains on our doorstep because the zoning was so bad. We had a club. Now it doesn't exist. We had a club / restaurant in our yard. And so, I never imagined I would be here. I never even imagined that I would run for office. And so I don't take this for granted at all, because there are so many people who, just struggle to make it day by day. And when I think about my own life and where I am today, in many ways, I'm the privileged poor, because there were certain choices that I made or access that I had or I took advantage of that somebody probably didn't have that access. There wasn't a teacher who said, go to this program. There wasn't a guidance counselor, right? Or a teacher in their school who said, I'm going to drive you to college. There wasn't a teacher who said, you are going to go to college. You're not going to go to the military, which all I had to do was sign the papers. And 9/11 happened within my freshman year, my first year of college. So I don't even know if I would be here. So I'm very grateful. But there are also many stories like mine. Right? So my goal is, how do we ensure that regardless of what neighborhood a kid lives and where they grew up or what choices they make in life, they always have access to a pathway that will lead them to success?
When did you start figuring out that you would pursue something in politics?
So the first time I ran for office was class president, 8th grade at Nathaniel Green. Okay. I ran against my best friend. One of the people I ran against was my best friend, Andrea Johnson. I'll never forget this. And I was like, oh my goodness, she's going to win. So I rapped. I made up this rap.
Do you remember it?
I love that.
And I won by almost everyone voted for me, but it was this stupid rap. And then I ran for class president in my junior year of high school and senior year. I'm like, I have to focus on, getting into college. But I never thought that I would run for office. I didn't become a citizen until, what year was it? Was it 2006 or 2007? But my first election that I voted in was Barack Obama.
Wow.
Me too.
I voted for. Yep. After I became a U.S. citizen. And so I didn't think that running for office was meant for someone like me. I just remember for his election, I made calls. We passed out flyers. I was living in Philly, and I was living in like the Germantown, Mount Erie, West Oak Lane area. But before I went to college, and I think it was my freshman year before I went to college, it was the Al Gore and Bush election. I'll never forget that. And that was like the first time I really paid attention to an election, and we saw how, like what happened in Florida. Mm-hmm. And I kept on saying to myself, wow, we need to make sure that people are voting. And I couldn't understand why someone who's born with the right to vote didn't vote. Mm-hmm. Right. And I couldn't vote then because I wasn't a US citizen then. And I just, and I'm like, oh my gosh, you think about the civil rights movement and what people sacrifice. Women sacrifice. I mean, 57 years ago, right? Bloody Sunday happened. Right. And people shed blood so that we can have the right to vote. And yet people don't take voting seriously. Mm-hmm. And so I remember promising myself that I would become a U.S. citizen, and every election I would make sure that I vote, and I would encourage other people to vote. So I guess it started there. But again, never thought that I was going to run for office. And it wasn't until I was already back home in Providence, and then Trump got elected, and I was like, "Oh, people are crazy out here." We need representation, right? And it's the same old people who are getting into these positions. So how do we change that? And I had a conversation with my friend Felicia, and I was running a race, and she's like, Nirva, if you don't do it, you're going to regret that you didn't do it. The worst that could happen is that you lose. She was right. The worst that could happen is that I lose. So I decided to run, and I won. And that's, it's been kind of like this working hard towards, just creating a better community for my city, the people. And now I want to change things, at the municipal level, and for us to elect the first woman, the first Black person to be mayor, and and a person who was formerly undocumented, who's also an immigrant. So someone who truly represents the diversity of our beautiful city. 100%.
I was going to say that. I was like, the history of Providence, mm-hmm. it's been mm-hmm. obviously predominantly white up until mm-hmm. Alorza and who was the one that was before Alorza?
Tavares.
Yes. Mm-hmm. Who are both Latino, but mm-hmm. it would be such a pleasure to see. For me, it's not even about, of course, being a Black woman is so amazing mm-hmm. to have that position, but just a woman. Yeah. We saw what the administration of Gina Raimundo mm-hmm. did for us, especially during COVID. Mm-hmm. And I feel like there's just a different, this could be biased because I'm a woman, but I think like women think more logically. Mm. And I think that mm-hmm. the world has been ran by men for so long. Mm-hmm. And look at the result. Like mm-hmm. maybe we need more women in place.
For sure.
So what I wanted to ask was, what is the role of a councilwoman? Because I'm sure a lot of people don't even know what that is.
All right. So a council person in general, a council person serves as like the legislative body for a municipality. So at the state level, you have the assembly, you have the Senate, you have the House. And at the city level, the people who are passing legislation is the city council. And so, and in many ways too, you are the representative of your ward, right? So if there's an issue, you are the person that they elect to bring that issue to the city to vote on, on behalf of that particular ward. But as a collective, we represent the city of Providence. Mm. And so I think that's really important for people to understand, because there are minor things like a street sign, right, that shows up. You would reach out to your council person about that. A pothole not being fixed, mm-hmm. your council person can advocate.
Hit someone up that I know who works in the government here mm-hmm. locally, and I'm like, who do I gotta hit up about this pothole problem?
Council person, your council person. Funding for your schools, right? Even though the state took over our schools, but your council mm-hmm. person, you would talk to them, or if our structure was a little different, our school board would have more autonomy and would, make decisions about the budget, but that's not the case in Rhode Island. But as mayor, I would hope to work with the state to change that. But that would be kind of like your representative for the city of Providence and for your community.
Okay.
And Okay. Going off of the point of education, and you spoke about what your education looked like as a young adult and as just a child. As you know, we have an issue right now in terms of Providence's educational system. What would be some of the first steps that you would take in order to try to shift that reality?
Yeah. So Providence educational system has had its challenges, for quite some time. So I went to Pleasant View, Nathaniel Green, Mount Pleasant High School. I ended up, when I graduated, I went to Bethune-Cookman College, which is an HBCU in Daytona Beach, Florida. But because of financial and personal challenges, I had to transfer. I had my son at a very young age, right before I turned 20. But I eventually got my undergraduate degree from Temple University and my graduate degree in urban education policy from Brown University. So one thing I will say is we have to also be careful when we say, Providence has failed everyone. Because I know some pretty successful women and just women, men, people who have gone through our schools. But again, it comes down to how do we ensure that people have access to the tools and resources in order for them to be successful?
Right.
So the data has been consistent. We know that over 90% of our kids are students of color. We know that majority of our kids receive free and reduced lunch, which is an indicator of, their socioeconomic status, right? We know that majority of our kids, English is not their first language, and they speak multiple languages, because English is actually my third language. And I could have even said, because in my family, we spoke French, Creole. My father's mother is of Cuban descent, so she spoke fluent Spanish, right? So we heard all of that in our house and in our communities. So if we know that these are the barriers that our kids have to overcome, right, to be successful in school, and they're coming from communities where parents have to work. My parents worked like 3 jobs. Both my parents were CNAs. So they can't show up to at night community meetings because they're working second shift or third shift. Then what we need to do is figure out how do we create our schools so that they could serve as community hubs where kids have access, but also how do we leverage our partnerships with some of our local entities? So we have kids who went to Brown Summer High School, URI summer programs.
Brown Summer High School.
I went there too.
Yeah.
And it's been around for many, many years. I think over 30 years now.
Summerbridge has been around for a long time.
Summerbridge has been around. How can we do a better job in identifying kids who would experience summer learning loss to make sure that we are, sharing data, and those kids, we know that they went through these programs, and then we could see what the correlation is between those kids participating in those programs in their academic achievement. We have to be more strategic around the resources and services that we provide. Our kids say they come to school and they've experienced or seen trauma, right? So we should make sure that we have social emotional support for every single kid in our schools and make it easy for them to access it, regardless of what insurance they have, right? We know that we have a shortage of teachers of color. Boston has a Boston residency program that has produced more teachers of color, more effective teachers after 5 years of teaching and beyond, and they stay in the teaching field much longer. Providence or the state of Rhode Island should have a teacher residency type program. We could be partnering with Mount Pleasant. Mount Pleasant has the Teacher Academy. Kids could be taking classes in their junior year at RIC, preparing them to be future educators so they look like the kids. They look like the students that they're educating. And also making investments in our community centers. We know that kids go to libraries after school.
Yes.
Every day after school, I went to the library. It was either Knight Memorial Library or I went to Washington Park Library. We moved to Washington Park. That was our second home. Right? Because my parents couldn't afford paid after school programs. So the library should have access to the curriculum, right? There should be programs that the kids could just pull up to do their practice, their math, their, language arts, and tutoring, right? So we have to we need a comprehensive educational plan for the state of Rhode Island in general. And then our municipalities, our districts should be given the tools and resources. They create their own plan and given the tools and resources so that they can invest in the whole child and that every kid could be successful. Right. So we've been politicizing education and not prioritizing the kids. And I'm tired of it because my kid is a public school kid. My son graduated from classical. He's a second year in college. And the level of advocacy just to get him minor things was ridiculous, considering when we moved back to Providence, he came with paperwork. My son was supposed to have an IEP. It took me 4 years to get him a 504B plan.
Wow.
Right? So think about parents where English is not their first language. Right. They have to work. They don't have the flexibility to go into the schools or to call people. So we have to do better.
So a lot of this comes down as well into a matter of funding. And for those who may not understand the complexities of that, how are we able to just even make a dent in terms of some sort of shift toward change or toward more consistency in the programs like you mentioned, so that all kids statewide, despite their levels of privilege, have that access, like you say.
Right. So the way the funding works is per pupil, right? We have the set funding per pupil, and the city of Providence actually has one of the like the higher funding for their kids. I think it's over $17,000 per kid. Yeah. But I'm not giving you the exact number. I'm so sorry, it slipped my mind, but it's definitely over 17,000, right? The problem is that we spend a lot of money on administration. And also the funding formula, when you look at the funding formula, a kid who receives a district or that has more kids that receives, or the funding formula, the way it works, I'll rephrase that, where if you receive free and reduced lunch versus free lunch, it's weighed the same. So you could have in Providence where, let's say, 90% of the kids qualify for free and reduced lunch. But then you have Newport where, and I'm just using some random example, 30% of the, kids receive reduced lunch, free lunch, and the majority receive reduced lunch. They're going to be weighed the same. Wow. So we need to ensure that our funding formula doesn't weigh those things differently. So if you're receiving free lunch, you should be getting more funding. It doesn't also count ESL or EL, English language learners, because English doesn't necessarily mean it's your second language. There are many kids who speak more than one language at home or more than two languages, amongst other things. But again, we're spending a lot of money on we're top heavy, and we need to really direct funding into the kid.
Yeah. So, from a mother's standpoint, I think that a lot of the issues is also there's a disconnect between the school and the parent, with communication. I'll get a text message from PPSD saying there's a Zoom meeting tonight and I'm like, okay, well, I'm at work. I can't go to these meetings. I need to know in advance. Or just I remember when my daughter was in pre-K, they used to hold meetings in the morning. I'm like, there's no way that I can drop off my daughter, go to school, go to these meetings. I need to, get to work. So I know that I watched an interview where you talked about community development, and I want to know what that looks like for you in terms of, making the community more enriched.
Community development, community engagement. So one of the things that when Chris Marr was the superintendent, I brought an idea to him because when we lived in Philly, my son went to a charter school, a smaller charter school. It was one of the first schools in the state of Pennsylvania in Philly that had a dual language program. So he was in Spanish immersion. So all his classes were in Spanish, except for when they brought in a teacher to teach them English grammar, gym, music, everything was in Spanish. And their whole concept was global citizenship. The school also had a significant achievement gap between the immersion program because a lot of parents of color weren't in the immersion programs. And it was a small percentage of us and we all knew each other versus Enhance. They also realized that they weren't engaging with the families because the school was downtown. So kids were bused from every single zip code in the city of Philadelphia. Downtown, right? Yeah. Center City area, right before South Philly. And so we had a group that advocated, and when I was in college, I had Dr. Frank Johnson always told us, I took a race and racism class. He was write letters. So I was very good at writing letters. I wish I had more time to write letters, but I would write 2-page letters, 3-page letters, like, this is the problem. How about these solutions? So I wrote a letter to the head of the school, and she was like, you should consider joining the board. And I ended up, and it was an elected board. So I ran and I won my board seat. But, as a board, one of the things that we listened to the parents and the teachers, and they were like, there was this disconnect from the schools. And also parents had a hard time even connecting with parents. So we ended up, investing to make sure that we had funding for a culture kind of coordinator, a school cultural coordinator. That would be the liaison between the school and the community. And what they started doing was really changing the way we communicated to families. And they heard, because we did these family surveys, and we found out, guess what? Like, those early morning meetings, because they used to have like coffee time in the school. I couldn't go. I'm like rushing. I'm trying to get to work on time. And so we took the meetings outside of the schools. And what they started doing was going into the community, having the meetings in the neighborhood libraries. They had sometimes like Saturday activities. They just found ways to connect with parents. We also partnered with Comcast, where all families that qualified for free or reduced lunch were able to get a notebook. But to get the notebook, it was encourage parents to come to the school for parent-teacher conference. And during that time, parents signed up to also get training on how to use the notebook, and you got a discounted rate on internet at home. And so not only did it encourage parents to come in, we also had translators, right, to make sure that we're able to communicate with the parents. We created space, right, for parents to learn and engage with, with the teachers in the school community. So what we did was basically did this whole event around engagement, but you also like found out what was happening in the classroom with your kid.
Right.
And we started increasing participation and just doing different things, right? Doing like mural events, but trying to figure out how can we create fun activities, but also create learning opportunities for the families to better engage with the schools and to get to know the teachers and stuff. And also just thinking about the achievement gap, right? To try to fill that. We had a whole Saturday school initiative. We didn't rely on the parents to bring their kids to the schools. We paid for the bus. To bring the kids to the schools. We made sure kids had like a meal, breakfast, and then they had lunch, and we were able to send them home with food as well. So again, it goes down to, how do you make sure you take care of the whole child? Right. The whole child includes also their family.
Yes.
Right? Because you got to be able to bring them to the table or meet them where they're at. So if we know transportation's an issue, we know parents don't work your regular 9 to 5. How do we work around that to make the school more accessible to them by going into their communities, right? Yeah. So I think part of the work is, we really need to invest in more cultural coordinators, and the district has continued on with that concept. But we need more than just one in each school, but have a whole team that's in community and family engagement shouldn't be at central office. Every school should have a community engagement office. Right. So decentralizing it a bit.
What you say definitely brings someone to mind in terms of like a Saturday school and helping kids out on a weekend. The principal right now at Hope High School, Mr. Velasquez, he's a former mentor of mine. He wasn't a teacher of mine, but he was like a fill-in teacher when I was in middle school, and then he became a teacher, and he used to on Saturdays like pick up students who needed extra math help and would give them Dunkin' Donuts and bring them home, whoever needed rides home. But I know that was something that he saw a need for, but also came like genuinely. So in terms of initiatives in that, like that you beautifully established, I would so be behind that, especially if I were a parent. Does that also include a matter of like volunteer hours from an educator, right? So would it be in terms of like an extra pay for educators, or like they wouldn't be compensated per se? Would it be more just like to make that part clear in terms of, because I think that could be part, not all of it. Yeah, like part of why we don't see more initiatives that way. Like that's why I can only think of like one educator who has like done something like that,
So when we were in Philly, we paid educators because people have lives. They have families themselves. So if you're going to ask them to do this additional work, then I think we do have to compensate our educators. And number one, when we think about the whole profession of education, we don't value it as much as we value other professions. And at the end of the day, educators are the ones who are preparing people to be future leaders, whether they become lawyers, they become elected officials. It's the educators that are doing that. So I think if you're going to ask someone who has their own family, their own life, right, to do this work, also to hold them accountable, you should compensate them and compensate them fairly. But again, that makes we have to have a comprehensive plan, allocate that funding to do so. We have ARP funds that came in, right? This is one in a lifetime funding that our municipalities, our districts are receiving. We need to make sure that we're using it strategically so that the investments that we're making are sustainable.
And the comprehensive plans in terms of as a whole as to where funding goes, is that revisited every year?
Well, the budget is revisited every year because we have to pass a budget. Right now, because the school district is at the state level, the state makes the decisions for the budget, but it's our tax dollars. At the end of the day, we are paying taxes to fund our schools. So we have a right and a say. And if something doesn't look right, that's why I push a lot of times with the district. And I may be a pain in people's butts, but, you know, I'm like, what are you spending the money on? Like, you know, I want to understand this a little bit more because I want to know how our money is being spent, right? And so, again, we have to, it's too top heavy. Right. It's too top heavy. We need to invest in the students. We need to invest in the teachers. We need to make sure that, you know, our school serves the communities that they're in.
And I think that's a perfect segue into, you also talked about increasing transparency and community engagement in the, in offices. So I think a lot of the problem is what you just said is like, where is the money going? I hear that from people all the time. You know, I pay taxes. Where does it go? How do you plan to do that? Or what do you imagine that would look like for people?
Well, I think some of the things that we can do to be a little bit more transparent is, you know, there are various methods. We can have town hall meetings. We can have an annual report, a clear annual report that, again, is accessible, that people understand what this report is saying, what these dollars mean, where they're going into. And I think and it's not just like the budget report, because that could get a little overwhelming when you're looking at, you know, all
these numbers,
and you're going through pages of these departments, but having something clear that each department, you know, presents, and it's something that we make accessible on our website during a town hall. You know, as mayor, we can have town halls in different communities to talk about the budgets and how money is being spent, and also get people's input in, you know, future budgets, how we should be spending the money, where these allocations should go towards. Excuse me. I'll use an example. So I passed legislation, last year, to create a task force for the American Rescue Plan Act. Right. We engage in one of the most robust community engagement process in the whole state of Rhode Island, where this task force and the consultant team went into different communities. We met with different neighborhood associations. We got their input, and we provided recommendations on how those funds could be spent based on community input. Even the survey that we sent out got more respondents than the survey that the state sent out. We can have. This can be a norm. We can normalize that process and how we spend funding. We're not going to meet every single person. Right. We're not going to be like, okay, to the T, we're going to do X, Y, and Z. But I think we have to do a better job in engaging the community so that they're aware of how we're utilizing resources that directly impact them.
And I know that also the housing is like a huge issue right now. And when I told people that we were interviewing you today, they were like, well, tell her the rent is too high. And and I could just feel the anger, you know, understandably so, because rent is so high right now. I know that Mayor Lorza has been, I don't know if he piloted this program, but there's been a lot of relief funds sent out to landlords and such. So what is your idea behind affordable housing?
Right. So a lot of the relief funds, it's because of with the pandemic and some of the stimulus funding that came out that allowed us to be able to do that, and that's something, that came from the federal government. And, And also, definitely, the city, the administration definitely made sure that we had like some funding and working with the state for our landlords or for our tenants, right, to be able to pay their bill, and working with our social services agencies like United Way and some of our community centers to help out as well. So housing is a major issue. We have one of the oldest housing stocks in the nation. It's economics, supply and demand, right? We have low housing stock. So the demand is high, the supply is low. We need more housing. We need more affordable housing. We need housing across every like socioeconomic bracket. We need to build more housing. The cost of building continues to rise up. And so what we need to figure out is how do we, one, incentivize like our local developers to build houses. I actually introduced legislation that would incentivize developers to build housing and affordable housing, and the incentive would be based on the AMI, right? And then we also need to look at different programs in terms of like zoning and how we can build like small, like utilize smaller lots and turn them into homes for people, and also create pathways for home ownership as well. I mean, you look at our city. I think it's it's about approximately like 30% of our residents actually own their homes.
Wow, that's
we can
low.
do better, right? So we need to work with our local community-based agencies, the ones that also focus on housing, to build more housing. And we also have some models that have worked. We have West Elmwood Housing. They have an inclusionary zoning model where you have mixed income, residents living in a house. That's building a diverse community. Right. Because I think part of the challenge too, historically has been we build affordable housing, a low income housing, and we just throw it in certain neighborhoods. Yeah. Right? Yeah. We need to think about building communities. And that's what West Elmwood Housing did. Yeah. We need to think about access to public transportation. So I've been working on a project along the North Main Street corridor, which is a underutilized corridor. And it was an idea. I'm part of this progressive group of elected officials throughout the nation called New Deal Leaders. And so I run, although I went on a run this morning and my pace was very slow. I was very tired. But, I love running down North Main in like these long corridors, Allen's Avenue, like running through Onlyville. And I've ran through every neighborhood in the city. And
who else can say that? Who else can, like, what other elected officials, politicians in the state can say, I have really
running in these streets?
Like running in these streets. I have ran through these streets. I have broke bread with various people in these different neighborhoods.
Played a little chess though, but I wasn't good with the guys on Broad Street right next to the McDonald's, because they would hang around. And I'm like, what you doing? And we start talking. At first
but experiences like that also solidify, the qualities of a qualified
yes, ma'am.
mayor.
Yeah. Yes, ma'am. So, you think about North Main Street, it's underutilized. There is so much potential there for mixed use development. You have commercial space on the bottom, art space, art studios, housing, residential on top. We can implement some of that West Elmwood model, create some housing for artists like AS220 has done in the downtown area. But then people don't necessarily have to have a car. If we create a corridor where you can have access to multimodal transportation, where there's bike lanes, people can walk, it's lively, people can drive their bikes or take the bus, which the R line is one of the most active transit lines in the state of Rhode Island, right? It should be free because it crosses through it starts at the border of Central Falls, Pawtucket, Providence, and then you stop, right on the border of Cranston. So again, it comes down to we need to look at things with a more comprehensive lens. And, the work that I do, in higher education as an administrator, as an advisor, is looking at gaps, right? And, helping students, navigate the open and co-curriculum, but also when there is a gap, because at the end of the day, I might have a student that comes from an affluent family, and I might have a student who comes from a town that borders Mexico, right? Which I've had. Both students have to graduate, right? Both students need resources, but also it's identifying what are the type of resources that each student needs to be successful. So when we're creating policies, we can't create these cookie cutter policies, right? We did it with like No Child Left Behind, right? Which was like a really bad policy.
A disaster.
That's a whole other episode.
It is, yes. But the people who created those policies were some of the top 1%ers of our country. So again, we need policies that are created, but that takes a comprehensive lens, so that we're thinking about not just like, we're thinking about, well, how does that impact people, right? Their communities, how do they have access to it? Because you can say, oh, we have this program.
Right. But if nobody knows.
Will Amy?
Yeah.
Will, Julia? Will this person have access to it? Right? So there has to be a whole campaign around it. And the plan has to be comprehensive, where it's this program, it's how we're going to make sure that people have access to it, how we're going to make sure that it's sustainable, how we're going to continue sustainable, meaning it's funded, it continues on, so that we're not constantly recreating the wheel. Because one of the biggest challenges in our city, in our state in general, is that we start something, it stops, then we start over again. We've had the same problems.
Look at the construction.
Decade after
Same
decade.
problems.
Look at the construction problem.
Same problems.
I want to ask, because maybe 2 days ago, I forget her name. We're friends on Facebook, but there was someone that had a bad experience over at Nick's on Broadway.
I'm dropping an article about it tomorrow. I talked to Janie today. Did you hear about that?
No, tell me more.
So in a nutshell, a woman shared on Facebook. The post has now gotten a lot of traction on Facebook, on Instagram, that she went to Nick's on Broadway on Friday. When she went in, she was actually with a former student of hers and taking her out for brunch. And the student lives like in that neighborhood, and she chose that spot. So when they go in,
can you put your mic? Sorry, didn't mean to.
Hey.
There you go.
Okay. So the hostess, when they were greeted by the hostess asked, like, do you have a reservation? And Janie was like, no, we don't. And they were like, okay, well, we are going to have to seat you outside. Now,
Janie from City Year? Oh, that's Jenny. Yes. Okay. All right, Jenny. All right.
Right. So Janie explained, like, in her status, like, it was, morning time. It wasn't even nice out to be outside that way, even though there was a space heater.
It was 29 degrees, she said.
Right, 29 degrees. But the point is, she already kind of felt weird over the fact, like, okay, we're going to be seated outside. They're seated outside, and then this woman sees her friend be, like, 20 minutes after, like, suddenly sees her friend seated inside. So on her way out, when she's going to say hello to her friend on her way out, she's like, did you have to make a reservation to be seated in here? And the friend was like, no, actually, like, kind of like, what do you know? Like
she was confused.
Yeah, like, I don't have to make. And I spoke with that woman today as well, and she told me actually that when she walked in, again, after Janie did, there was no question about a reservation. Actually, they even said, we can make a reservation for you. And she was sat inside. I don't think.
And there were empty tables.
And there were, as Janie walked by, there were 3 empty tables. Now, there could be a rebuttal of, oh, maybe there was reservations for them. But I think this second woman's experience of needless to say, is a white woman, was not asked if she had a reservation, was offered a reservation, was seated before the reservation time. So that happened. And there has been a lot of people within the community talking about it and very outraged.
Shout out to Alexis.
Yes, from Solita. She's definitely given me a lot of, like, insight in terms of doing an article about it. And any concern that has been expressed to the owner has been deleted, blocked, removed.
Yeah, he's blocked multiple people from the Nick's on Broadway account so that they can stop commenting and trying to raise awareness about this.
And there has been other testimonies about, like, a similar experience.
Like, other people have had similar experiences. And I know that one of your focuses is to support minority and women-owned business. And my goodness, we're in the era of, like, all our peers are starting their businesses. So we have, like, Amber from Black Leaf Tea. We have
Jackson.
Yeah, we have even Akeem, who works with children, and so many more. I can go on forever. Priscilla at the Glow Cafe. We even have Neo who changed his life and sells clothing, and shout out to Sealed Lips and Solita, Alexis. We can go on.
So many people.
Like, so many businesses, so many creatives. Like, we are the creative city.
It's a boom happening.
It literally is. So how do you? Because I know the PVD Fest is like a hub for that, and then there's issues like this that don't get addressed. So in your administrative, like, you as mayor, how will you protect those businesses or enhance those businesses?
Yeah. So first, I want to acknowledge this incident that happened. I am so sorry that happened to your friend, or just it shouldn't happen to anyone. Right. And this is just a reminder about the inequities that happened, that continue to happen. And as you were telling me the story, I remembered when I moved back home to Providence, and when I was looking for an apartment, I had my mentor, who's an older white woman. She was going to the apartments, and we had found this apartment in my ward, the ward that I represent now. There was an apartment close to where I live, but in the Summit neighborhood on the other side of Hope Street. And we put a deposit in everything. The apartment was ready. When I came to check out the apartment, they told me that the apartment might not be available. And I'm like, well, we gave a deposit. Yeah. Holding the apartment. Mm-hmm. And I remember they held my deposit up until for 2 months. And I got nervous, and I finally was like, all right, can I have my deposit back? Because I need to find an apartment. And they were like, oh, we think we're going to sell it, but it was unclear. And they never sold it because somebody eventually got the apartment. And so that has to stop. I do hope that the owner of the restaurant can engage in a meaningful conversation and apologize. But we also have to talk about these truths, because these things are happening. And if in order to resolve it, we need to be able to have an open and honest dialogue, because it is a traumatic experience. And if we want to create more equitable communities, and anti-racist and, anti-blackness and anti-blackness communities, then we have to talk about it. But we also all businesses also have to put structures in place to prevent it from happening, whether it's training, whether creating, no tolerance policies when it comes to these things, and also being clear, right, to people who are coming, because at the end of the day, they're patrons. They're spending the same amount of money as everybody else.
If you were to see the reviews on Google for this establishment, it's obviously there's different extremes. You have people putting a review that they didn't like the plate that they were served, right? And now you have a woman talking about this experience. But it seems as though there's a common trend, whether it be a few weeks ago, 6 months ago, 2 years ago, of just invalidation and this aggressive defense mechanism from the establishment owners. But again, this is an establishment that has been where it's at for the past 20 years. So
I've gone there,
and it's very popular, and the food is great.
It is,
it's
and
nothing
I've had
against
good experiences, but I had a good experience. That doesn't mean that we have to dismiss somebody else's negative experience and dismiss their narrative. We have to acknowledge those things, right? So, yeah. And so, going back to your point about how do we, one of the things that we don't have at the city, just in general, is, it's really hard for people to start and expand their business, especially small business owners and entrepreneurs in the city of Providence. I still remember when I first met Amber said, I'm going to open up a business. I'm going to open up a tea business. I was like, all right, Amber, go ahead. And she shared, she was like, in Chicago, she was like, we had Urban League, and I could go to them for resources. And she's like, here, it's really hard to navigate those resources. I don't know where to go. Rodlin does my hair, right? Bo Essence, which is, she's a small business owner, Black woman. And she was opening up her own salon. I gave her the website, and she's like, oh my goodness, this is overwhelming. I still have to, run my business on a regular basis. And I had to give her a direct number. But you shouldn't have to know a person to be able to just get basic information. So one of the things that I would like to do is within our economic development office is to have an entity that is completely dedicated to small businesses. And we have a small business liaison and have visible resources so people know from A to B how you can start your business and also how you can expand their business, from information around licensing to inspections to documents that you need, when you need to submit them, the cost, so that information is clear and is streamlined, so people are not being are not being sent all around the world just for one answer.
Yeah.
Right. So I would love to do that. And also, one of the things we need to look at too is how can we also establish some seed funding for our local entrepreneurs, our entrepreneurs of marginalized identities, to be able to start their businesses. Because I think that also sometimes is the challenge. You have an idea and it's a really great idea, but you don't have even the money to kickstart it. Mm-hmm. And when you don't have the financial and social capital to raise money and to find investors, that makes it quite difficult. So part of this entity, creating networking opportunities, working with some of our local agencies like Greenhouse Enterprise, some of these, agencies that support women entrepreneurs to help create classes and network opportunities to connect people to mentors, possible investors. Yeah. But we can do a better job, and other municipalities have done that.
I wanted to circle back to the housing because we have a growing problem of homeless people and camps showing up in different places, under bridges, off the highway, right in Providence. What, as mayor, what would you do to solve that or lessen that and get these people in some type of program, home? Yeah. Whatever, to get them off these streets and get them into a place where they can, rehabilitate or something of sort. Yeah.
So the encampments that have been happening is not just unique to Providence. It's all over. I was reading about, that happening in Philly, Boston, Boston, LA. LA has had their problem, right? Yeah. Skid Row. And I walked through Skid Row years ago when I was in LA. But I mean, Portland, Oregon, when I've been there, they have a significant homelessness issue. So there are a couple of things that we can do a little differently. One, we don't have a guaranteed housing legislation here, which guarantees everyone, the right to housing. The state of Rhode Island spends less than $5 per person on housing, right? Where Massachusetts, I'll take that back. Just to be safe, we spend less than $8, because I'm doing the math in my head. We spend less than $8 per person on housing.
That's still crazy.
It's crazy. Massachusetts, which is not a lot, spends $99 per person, a little over $99 per person on housing. That's a significant gap. So we don't even spend enough money on people in providing housing for people. Additionally, our systems don't necessarily talk to each other. So you might have someone, there's someone who's homeless, I know. And in fact, this is someone, there are many people in the community. This person is downtown, has tried to help. And, this person has found housing. But then there are other challenges this person struggles with, right? There's, mental behavioral challenges and all types of stuff. So someone might have housing, but then if they're not getting the services, then they can't keep the housing because they're not getting their medicine. They're not getting the support that they need to navigate these other things. And so we need to provide. So when we're creating housing, we need to also think about, again, creating communities and wraparound services and making sure that people have access to those wraparound services. But Providence by itself can't do it alone. We need to be working with the state. There is a commitment with ARP funds to create more housing in Providence. There is a commitment at the state level to create more housing. So what we need to do is be working directly with the state to maximize those funds so that we not only are creating housing that is accessible to all residents, but also thinking about how do we make housing accessible, but also can provide the needed services, right? So when you create these communities, think about if someone has experienced housing for 20 something years, and there are basic things that cause people to lose housing. Like the average person is one paycheck away from losing their home. I'm a single parent. Right. I've been homeless actually when I was pregnant with my son living in Florida. And luckily for me, I wouldn't necessarily be considered homeless, because I was sleeping on my friends' couches. Right. I was pregnant, high risk pregnancy. Right. And I couldn't even afford in Miami to live, my own apartment. And I had to live way out there. The apartment that I found was Opelika, right on the, finally, right on the Fort Lauderdale border. But before that, I had a roommate and our housing was in the center in North Miami Beach. Like I could walk to public transportation. The Publix was right there. It made life so much easier. And so again, when you're building housing, you need to think about communities, but we also have to spend more money on housing. We also have to, when we think about housing, how do we make sure people have access to transportation? I still remember when I went out with House of Hope before the pandemic, years ago before the pandemic, we gave this man a ride and I was like, oh, where's your family from? He's like, Pawtucket. And I'm like, Pawtucket? How come you haven't seen your family? He's like, I don't have money for public transportation. So it's like Pawtucket's right over the line. Our line can take you to Pawtucket, right? But it's the part of Pawtucket his family lived in. He had mobility issues. He couldn't walk long distance. He limped. So it's again comprehensive plans, providing wraparound services, but also investing in housing and making it a little less complicated to build housing, safe, clean, affordable housing for all people.
And so.
I want to just, because you mentioned that the state is not really communicating with the cities, and how can you communicate with the other cities and also the state so the funding does get to Providence and gets to all the programs, everything that we need to improve, because it seems to be a lack of everything happening right now.
And we have a lot of abandoned houses.
Oh my gosh,
yes. And I passed by with my mom, like, what's good with that? It gets me heated. Why has that been there for the past 5 years? It's like we look at it, it's boarded up, we don't even do anything about it.
Have you seen what used to be considered Clown Town? Have you seen? All those houses are empty, boarded up.
Yep. Right. Yep. I mean, some of these houses, I went to school with people who lived in them, right?
Same.
So I believe in collaborative work. I mean, my work in higher education, you have to work across the board, like going to conferences, learning about what other people are doing in their, in their university. And also even before the pandemic, going to different conferences, like National Leagues of Cities or New Deal leaders. And I'm learning from these other elected officials and seeing what they're doing in their municipalities. We need to do a better job just as a state in addressing some of these issues. We're not a large state. We're not. There's certain issues across the board. We should have more coordinated efforts. When it comes to education, we need a more coordinated effort. When we come to development of more housing and affordable housing, and housing for also low income, communities where they're they're either getting zero income or they're receiving some sort of SNAP benefit or whatever it might be, Social Security, whatever. But we need to have a more coordinated effort. And again, these systems should do a better job speaking with each other. So it's about collaboration, because at the end of the day, this is not like who could build housing for the fastest. This is about how can we, maximize the effort. So Pawtucket and Central Falls partnered, right? So on the border of Pawtucket and Central Falls, I don't know if you've ever noticed, when you get off the exit, you make that left into Central Falls, and you're in Pawtucket and you're going into Central Falls. There's all these beautiful townhouses, right? That was a partnership between Pawtucket and Central Falls. They got a, that's a HES identified area, a health equity zone. And they were able to get funding to build these beautiful townhouses, in apartments to create affordable housing opportunities. We could do more of that. Providence can partner with the state. Providence can partner with Pawtucket. Providence can partner with Cranston to make that happen. But again, we have to create these more comprehensive plan. And also you have multiple agencies, working on the same projects, right? So we have one pool of fund that comes in and everybody's competing with the same pool of fund. How do we work with even some of these development agencies where, one neighborhood builder is partnering with West Elmwood Housing, Omni Group is partnering with this group, Smith Street Housing, is partnering with this other group, or, the Mount Hope Neighborhood Association, Camp Street Ministry, not Camp Street, but the Mount Hope Neighborhood Association is partnering with this group, so that we can, again, work in partnership to maximize those resources to build more housing in our city.
And so for the last question, I would like to ask, what is the objective? Like, what is your message for those listening and saying, okay, yeah, she's Black. Yeah, she's a woman. Yeah, she's an immigrant and all this, stuff that represents us. But what, as Nirva LaFortune, what is the objective of your administration? If you become mayor, or when, right? Because we like to speak things into existence. What is your goal? What is the bigger picture for you?
Well, the administration is going to be an administration that serves all residents in Providence, all residents in every single neighborhood, regardless of your socioeconomic background, regardless of what neighborhood you live in, but a government and administration that has not forgotten the basics, but can serve all people, right? And because at the end of the day, I think about, we talked about like where my journey to here. I live in a ward, I live on a street where I didn't even know that part of the East Side existed. One thing I didn't talk about, my mom, right, was a CNA in someone's home on the East Side growing up. That was also the first time someone called her the N-word, right? And told them, my mom to go back to her country, don't touch me. And to think that I even represent a community in where my mom was working in someone's home. Because in many ways, a CNA is a glorified housekeeper, right? Because you taking care of people's medical needs, but you're also, like wiping them down, washing them, wiping their butts if they use the bathroom, cooking their meals. And so for me, it's about a Providence where you have an administration who listens to everyone, right? And create policies that meets everyone's needs. So the broader picture is to be a leader, to have an administration that is going to work for every single resident in Providence. Because in order for government to function efficiently and effectively and to have significant impact, it has to work for the people it's serving. And what we've seen for many years is that government doesn't work for everyone, especially if you're someone from marginalized identities. We see it with the rise of crime and where crime is happening. We see it with our schools that have been falling apart for years. We see it with our community centers where, they leak all the time. Ceilings are about to fall off. They flood when it rains. We see it where, some of our streets, our neighborhoods, there's trash everywhere. They can't even pick up clean up the public trash bins. That's not a government that works for all people, right? So my administration would be an administration with a government that works for all people and is making critical investments in our neighborhoods.
Well, that was perfect.
When is voting day so that listeners can mark their calendars?
Yes.
Are we
good
done?
Question.
Oh, yes. We're still talking.
Yeah.
So first of all, if you have not registered to vote, register to vote. Because if this immigrant, once undocumented person could run for office, y'all, if you were born here, you could register for vote. It's very easy. Go on the Secretary of State's website. You could do it right from home. You could do it on your phone. I also want everyone to vote. Go and visit my website at votenirva.com. You could either go to votenirva.com or vote nirvaforprovidence.com. And check out my website, my policies. And also, if you can, you could drop a little dime and make a little donation right on the website, because we need all the support that we can get. And the primary is going to be critical. It's the second Tuesday in September 13th. So we need everybody to come out. But even before the primary, this campaign is a people-powered campaign. I don't have the most money. I don't have the most resources, but we are going to win. But in order to win, we need people to support this campaign. So if you can, please sign up to knock on doors, sign up to host an event so that people can get to know me. People can donate, share my story, share my policies, tell people about me, spread the word. But most importantly, support any way that you can, because this is an opportunity for us to change the trajectory of politics, right, in the state of Rhode Island, and elect someone who not only truly cares about the community, but again, represents a diverse community of our capital city. So I just hope that everyone can support. And I'm very excited about this. It's scary, but I'm excited.
Yeah. I can only imagine.
We're out here. I love it.
Yes.
Thank you.
So thank you for coming, and thank you for, reaching out, because another issue that people talk about is Black media. I know DJ Ruckus especially, he's very passionate about that. And DJ Franchise, shout out to all our DJs and radio personalities. And so for you to reach out to Little Old Sparkle podcast means the world, because oftentimes our voices are not heard, they're not amplified, and they're not supported. So for you to come down here to speak to us and sit down and talk about your campaign and what you represent means everything. So we wish you all the luck, and we will be, I said I wouldn't be unbiased, but
Right. Leave it at that. Leave it at that.
we will be out here.
I said we out here. Take
thank
that
you.
as you want.
Thank you so much. And we'll be seeing you. We'll be seeing you around.
Thank you. I look forward to it. Thank you.
Vance, you want to take us out? Traditionally?
I'll let you do it this time.
I don't like when you do that, because you got the sauce. But yes, this is Spark Up Podcast episode 140. We sat down with Nirva LaFortune. I wish I could say it in your accent, but I'm trying out here. And get out there and vote. Go to her website, votenirva.com. That's VOTENIRVA.com. Primary voting is in September 13th, so you have time to go register. And we talk a lot, we complain a lot. Now let's do the work.
Don't say you're heated about Biden, but not vote your local elections, because unlike the presidential election, the local
This
votes
is where it
matter.
matters.
Exactly.
Yes.
So yes,
Especially now.
yes. Thank you for coming.
Thank you for having me.
It's a wrap.